Our Gospel today was written in the 8th chapter of the book of Mark, beginning at verse 31. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes into his Father's glory with the holy angels." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to you, O Christ.
It's startling, isn't it? Jesus rebukes Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." And often I think for me that's what really hits me in this passage is, oh wow, isn't that strong? Like that's what we remember about this. But actually, isn't the really startling thing that Peter rebuked Jesus? I mean, who does he think he is? And then, he's only just come off. Who does he think he is? Who does he think Jesus is? Well, we know who he thinks he is. He says, "You are the Christ." And then almost immediately turns around and rebukes him and tells him that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It would be humorous if it weren't really so tragic. And yet it's not often very different for us. We too often live our lives in such a way as to show that we don't really think that God knows what he's talking about. Like Peter, we're wrapped up in what the text calls human concerns or the things of human beings rather than the things of God. We're focused on the normal things of life. We're focused on our ways of making ourselves feel right and what our desires tell us is going to be the good way. And as we focus on those things, then we forget that there's a divine perspective. In the passage today, it draws a line down the middle of all our thoughts and words and deeds. On one hand, there's this side of setting your mind on human things, that seeking to save your own life, of gaining the world but losing your soul, and being ashamed of Jesus and his word. And on the other side of that dividing line, there is a way of life that sets your mind on the things of God, that gives up trying to save your life so that Jesus can save it for you, that values your soul more than anything else, and which is proud and willing to own Jesus. Jesus makes it very clear that the path of setting your own agenda and saving your own life is a dead end. We must be ready to say no to ourselves, or at least to our vision of who we are. See, human beings are all too easily wrapped up in and deceived by our own thoughts and desires. All too often we're undiscerning about what actually will make for true happiness and what leads us to our real selves. For example, I don't know whether you've had this experience. Actually, I do know you have had the experience, whether you're ready to admit to it or not. But can you recall a time when you were in an argument with somebody, and along the way, you phrased things in just one particular way that you knew would just sting the other person a bit as you were having the argument? Whether you can recall it or not, I'm sure it's happened. How counterproductive is that? How are you going to win an argument when all you're doing is making the person more and more oppositional to you? See how the desire, that part of, this is going to feel good, actually works against what is your actual good. And often we invest ourselves, sometimes for stretches at a time, in things that are obsessions to us. They might start out, so things that are obsessions. For example, someone recently mentioned cars, TV is one that I want to put on the table. Chess has been that for me. There's a certain computer game over the holidays became my obsession. And these things, they start out enjoyable. The reason they become obsessions for us is that we find in them some sort of life. We think that's where we're going to get life. But actually, as you invest in them more and more, whatever it is, as you invest in it more and more, what you find is the usual pattern of addiction is that you get less and less return. And so actually they start to they become compulsive without actually returning any joy. And worse than that, what they also do is that they then start to sap joy out of the rest of life, because as all your energy's going in here, you're not getting joy in the other places of life. So I can play my computer game for 16 hours a day. And it means that I've missed out on everything else, even at the point where for several days now I've not been quite so into it as I once was. And then there are those never-ending attempts that we have to enhance our self-esteem by putting on an act for others, or by being the creative one, or making ourselves strong, or knowing more, or getting everything right. And all those things, of course, can be good. It's good to be creative. It's good to get things right. It's good to be strong. But when we overplay that as a life strategy, these sources of satisfaction actually turn around and start to become sources of dissatisfaction. Suddenly I'm not the strongest one in the room, and now I'm unhappy. Or I'm being really strong and I'm hurting other people as I'm doing it. That's causing me unhappiness. Or I'm so busy getting to know more that I forget that sometimes you actually have to do something. And then, of course, we often chase after material wealth, security, fame, all those other sorts of things, in the hope that they will make us happy. But that chasing ends up making us feel empty. People too often get what they want, only to discover that what they want is not worth the getting. Jesus says that those who want to save their lives will lose it. The word that he uses here for life is also translated in some of our translations as soul. And it comes from the Greek psyche, from which we get the word, psyche. It stands for the whole of the human being, in a sense. In all your thinking and your emotions and your desiring and your choosing, it's all the intellectual and mental life of the human being. Soul is what distinguishes us from simply being chemicals. And in one sense, Jesus is warning us today, as he warns us about the danger of losing our life, of our souls. He's warning us that we are in danger of losing touch with our true selves. When we pay too much attention to ourselves that we perceive ourselves to be, we are often led astray into things that undermine us. And when you do only what you want, what you breed for yourself is dissatisfaction. In the last decade or so, happiness studies have taken off. There's a huge industry now in doing happiness studies. And it's interesting that, what they regularly seem to confirm is that the old religious writers were exactly right when they warned us that specifically seeking after happiness is, in fact, the worst possible way of trying to achieve happiness. Happiness does not come from wealth, from self-assertion, from doing fun things all the time, or living for yourself. Happiness is strongly correlated to connectedness, to the service of others. It's strongly correlated to purpose and spirituality and of legitimate achievement. And so these are the ways in which sometimes when we have in mind the things of human beings, what we're actually doing is robbing ourselves of the very satisfactions we can get. When we set ourselves up as those kind of people, what we do is we lose our true self. But that's not all that Jesus means. He's not just another happiness guru. Jesus also means that it's possible to arrange our lives so that we do all the things that the happiness experts tell us that it's right to do, and yet still not be happy. we can live our best life and still lose ourselves. And the reason is that human beings are filled with an amazing power of deluding ourselves. In the end, our true self, the self that will experience blessedness, is the self that we find in God. Our true self is the one that God intended and the one towards which God is leading us in Christ Jesus. We only come to that relationship, only come to that self in relationship to God. He's the Creator who made us with a purpose and knows who we are supposed to be. He is the Redeemer who has cleansed us of the taint of sin and death and the devil and washed that all away so that we can be who He made us to be. And He is the Sanctifier who in this life is growing us more and more into the people who will be our true selves. That of course brings us to the fact that there's another really serious edge to this saying. Those who want to save their life will lose it has a second and final meaning that goes beyond this life. Those who reject life with God in the end will have the only life that is possible without God. And that is no life at all. Those who cannot step beyond themselves and their own vision for themselves will eventually have to live with themselves. Those who have sought to save their life will truly have lost it. Here we might think of the parable of the rich fool. He stands for us all. God says to him, "You fool, tonight your soul will be required of you, and then who will get all these good things that you've laid up for yourself?" You fool, tonight your soul is required of you, and then what happens to the person you thought you were? What's the purpose of gaining the world and yet not having yourself, not being alive to enjoy it? But it doesn't have to be that way. Jesus gives us a way to discover real life, not just in the present, but also in the future. He points us to Himself as the source of a life that is really life. He says those who give up their own attempt to make life for themselves by following their own thoughts and desires, and instead are prepared to follow Him, will discover a life that is far more significant than the life that you leave behind. You see, the gospel tells us who we truly are. And Jesus knows us better than we know ourselves. To follow Him in the life of discipleship does at times seem hard. He makes no bones about the fact that at times that's going to feel like a cross. You need to take it up and follow Him. It's hard and difficult as we struggle with ourselves about this picture of what life should be and what it's about and who we are in that. But as we struggle with that, for the sake of Jesus, we are given our true selves back. That's of course true of eternal life. Of course, he tells us there's no point in gaining the whole world if in that very process you lose yourself. But the promise is that those who gain themselves through Jesus will have gained, in fact, in the end, will have gained the whole world and will have gained the glory of God the Father. The life Jesus offers is not just life for this world, it is gaining of ourselves for eternity. But it's possible now to begin to experience something of what that means. Jesus offers us nothing short of our own selves. I have this picture in my head of Jesus holding out a precious jewel. It's sparkling and faceted, it's rich in colours, it's transcendent and beautiful. It shines from within with the light of God. And He says to us, "Here you are. This is you and all that you were meant to be." It's that gift of discovering yourself in all the beauty for which God has made you. In all the times that you feel that you've lost touch with yourself, or you've sought after things that have turned out to be a disappointment, and all those times when you don't know who you are anymore, Jesus can tell you who you are, and He tells you how much you are valued. There are times when we feel like lumps of coal, but in the hands of Jesus we become diamonds. And we can trust him with this, because he has already done what he asks us to do. He lost his life for our sake. The journey that he asks us to take is no different to the one that he took for us. We must remember, of course, that this whole conversation starts with Jesus telling the disciples that he must suffer and be rejected and die and then rise again. More than that, he says he will come in the glory of the Father. Through his death and resurrection, Jesus has shown that God is prepared to give his life for us so that we can truly find our life in him. He doesn't summon us out of ourselves in order to hurt us. He doesn't say, take up your cross and follow me, because he thinks that that's going to be bad for us. But he does it because he loves us, and it's only by doing that that we are going to be in touch with ourselves and where we're going to find a life that is really life, both in this age and in the age to come. To take up your cross and to follow Jesus means to make the things of God the most important things. And that orients us to this world as it was intended to be and as it will one day be. In doing so then, we find a freedom against all the false selves and against all the false things that crowd into our lives. Because we have a God who speaks into our lives and calls us to follow, it then does become possible to say no to ourselves. We say no because I know that in the end God's way is the way that leads to life, and that our own thoughts and desires and selfish impulses so often lead us away from what is best for us. At times it seems that my latest obsession is the thing that will give me joy in life. But after a couple of weeks of playing it non-stop, actually what I find is it's just draining life from me. It's never really true. But when I'm following Jesus, and when I'm focused not just on the things that I can grab for myself or the sense of life that I make for myself, I find myself suddenly with a degree of freedom that enables me to overcome obsessions. When our minds are set on the things of God, we don't drop into conversations, those little verbal barbs that make life worse for us. When our focus is on following Jesus, those life strategies actually become beneficial to ourselves and to others. We can be strong and creative and knowledgeable and all those other things. We can strive to do really well and to work for perfection without it becoming obsessive and counterproductive. It should be no surprise to us that the traditional Lenten practices, which are taken from Matthew chapter 6 on Ash Wednesday, are fasting, almsgiving, and prayer. The discipline of fasting is, of course, the discipline of learning to say no to ourselves so that we can say yes to something else. It is a way of stepping away from our false selves. And the discipline of charitable giving is a way of giving our hearts to reach out to others, to serve with a purpose, and to show the love of God. And in that sense, it is a way of stepping into the true self that we have. And the thing that binds them together and makes them possible is the third discipline of prayer, which sets our mind on the things of God. For it's only from Jesus that we ultimately receive our self, our soul, and our life. In this time of Lent, we remember that it is possible to gain the whole world and yet still to lose yourself. And we remember that there is nothing that we can give in exchange for our soul. But we also remember that for those who give up their life for the sake of Jesus and are prepared to put ourselves second, we will discover that he has put us first. As we turn away from the things that we falsely think are us, he will give us back real life and our true selves. And in that gift of life, we may have lost the whole world, but we will have gained everything. So the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen.